and that was for me to get privileges. The therapy, as it were, was conducted by a social worker who would come on to the ward, which for the first 3 weeks there I was on a locked ward with 20 other men, and she'd come in and held meetings with people and just talk about it. And after I'd had several of these meetings, I finally one day asked her, I said, when do I get to see a psychiatrist? And she said, well, if you want to see a psychiatrist, you can go on the outside and pay $50 an hour, which is their equivalent of $2.50 an hour or whatever. And he said, well, I said, well, what am I doing here? And she said, well, we lock you up and I said, but there's nothing to do. And he said, well, that's the point. We lock you up with nothing to do, and you think about your problems, and if you think about your problems, you'll get well. So that was the background, and you know, to these people's credit, I mean, they were understaffed, and the wards were ran by the aides, minimum wage folks, who some way were just high school graduates, and if that, I guess. It was it led to the lead of my story, which was Central State was a warehouse for the storage of people, and that's what we were. We were stored. You know, we didn't really get care. So that was the main thrust of the story, and there were other things. I mean, I traded a pack of cigarettes for a marijuana cigarette. I watched, once I got off the locked ward the last week I was there, watched patients go to a barn behind the place to have sex, which I wasn't opposed to when they're locked up in that place. But anyway, they went and the dormitory that I was in had bars on all the windows, and at night they locked all the doors. And so if there had been a fire, you couldn't, not only could you not get out, but the firemen couldn't get in unless there was somebody there with a key. So it was a fire trap, and luckily it wasn't. And there were many other little things about day-to-day care and the condition of the buildings, the condition of the operation. They assigned you to your room not according to what was wrong with you, but where you came from. It was easier for them to keep up. So I was there with people from my home county. I pretended to be from my original hometown, Wilson County. So there are other Wilson County and Rutherford County people there. The upshot of it was, we came out and I did 8 stories, a series of 8 stories, detailing of everything. And nobody there knew I was a reporter, and very much surprised them. I came out, and when I went back to interview the superintendent, he thought I was lying. He didn't think I'd been a patient there. It wasn't until I met some people. Even some of them didn't recognize me because I was in a coat and tie and not in jeans and sweatshirt that I was as a patient. But at the time there were 1,600 patients there. 900 of them were not mentally ill. They were either sent there because there weren't public nursing homes or juvenile facilities for them. And so there were, on that original ward, there were 3 or 4 kids that were under 18 in there, teenagers, who were sent there by the juvenile court judges because their parents couldn't handle them, and the judge had no other choice, so he sent them off to Central State. And there was a group of elderly folks because they didn't have nursing homes and there was nobody to care for them, so they sent them there. You know, sometimes they had early dementia, sometimes they were just old. And so there was a legislative investigation, and the governor got involved, and they put up what was for then a lot of money, $2 million, to get the schools accredited. All of them were unaccredited except in Tennessee, except for a 125-bed hospital in Memphis, which was a research part. All of them were unaccredited. So they put up $2 million to get them accredited, and they offered to send all of the foreign doctors who did not have their degrees back to college to back at med school to finish their degree. And only one took him up on it, and he didn't stay. And, you know, I mean, these people were in their 50s and 40s, 50s. I mean, been 20, 30 years out of school. I mean, I'm not sure I could go back and do the biology required either, but be that as it may. But eventually they tore down Central State, and they got immediately transferred out all of the people who didn't belong in a mental hospital, and redefined what the mental hospital was like and should be. And so I know in my heart that I helped a lot of people by doing that series of stories.
That's amazing. So one big question, how did you get out of there once you were in?
Well, the first 3 weeks I was there, I was on a locked ward. And they brought our food. This was December and January, last 2 weeks of December and first 2 weeks of June. And they put our food on trays, individual trays, and walk across the yard, a few hundred yards from the cafeteria to our building, and we would eat there. And of course, it all got cold. But, I mean, there's nothing like cold eggs and frozen toast. And so I fought hard to get privileges. And privileges meant that you could leave the ward for 30 minutes a day, and the locked ward, and go to the canteen and buy candy or whatever. Then, that's the first round of privileges. Second round was to get transferred to what they called an open ward, where you had the run of the hospital. You weren't locked. They didn't check on you as in the sense that you weren't a prisoner anymore, and you were observed quite differently. And so I was a model patient in order to get that. And while I had that first round of privileges, the bathrooms in our locked ward were terrible, and I would use my 30 minutes off the ward each day to go up to the administration building and pose as a visitor to get a key to the locked visitors' bathrooms. They had locked the visitors' bathroom because, you know, they didn't want other people messing up as they usually do. So here I was, a reporter posing as a patient, posing as a visitor to go use a clean restroom every day. So going up to that administration building each day, there was a payphone there. And so I started calling Sigenthaler, John Sigenthaler, the editor, giving him briefings. And so one day I called him and I said, now Month's going to be up here next week. How are you going to come get me? You're going to come out here and announce that Ernest Franklin is really Frank Sutherland, a reporter. Ernest Franklin were my first two names, are my first two names. And he said, well, let's wait a minute on that. He said, do patients out there ever escape? And I knew, it was terrible. You'd think I had planned this, how I was going to get out of the hospital before that, but we hadn't. And he said, well, do patients there ever escape? And I said, yes, John, but most of them are caught. He said, how do they escape? I said, mostly they run out on foot. That's why they get caught, John. And he said, if you would have a successful escape, how would you do it? And I said, I would ride out with Alice, a reporter who was posing as my girlfriend, and just ride out and nobody would stop us. There was a main gate at the front with a guard at the gate. But, I mean, he didn't check IDs or anything. You just told him who you were. And the people who were on locked wards never got off the ward. So it wasn't like a prison exactly, but it wasn't easy. And he said, how many people escape in the car? And I said, very few people, John, because they don't get visitors. And the visitors that get them don't want to escape. So he said, don't you think that's part of the story? I'll never forget him saying that the escapes, that where they get caught is part of the story. And I said, and he said, I'll leave it to you how you escape. I prefer you do it on foot because that's what everybody else do. But under no circumstances are you to get caught. And so I was to go out on a Monday, and the day before was a Sunday, and Alice and a photographer named Bill Preston came out to shoot pictures of me on the campus because we didn't have any art, although I had smuggled in a little tiny spy camera and taking pictures, grainy pictures with that inside, it'd be things there. But, and so Alice came out, and Bill stayed in the car with a long lens and shot pictures of me sitting on a bench with Alice and walking around. And I was talking with Alice, and she said, you know, I've never come to visit you on a Sunday. There wasn't a guard at the gate. I said, really? And I said, we're going right now. She says, no, you're not supposed to go to the tomorrow. I said, no, I'm going to go out now while there's no guard at the gate. I can go on foot. And she said, well, what do we do? And I said, get Bill Preston. You all go park on the other side of Murfreesboro Road from where the main gate was and get pictures of me walking out. So I ran upstairs, packed all my worldly belongings in 2 grocery stacks. I had strings from my tennis shoes hanging out and dirty clothes and all of that. And I come out on the hall, and then there is an aide reading a paperback book. I said, oh my God, my stomach tensed, and I was wondering, oh, have I ever messed up now? But he never looked up. I walked past him to the back stairs, and down the stairs, and out, and started walking toward the main gate. And I hadn't gotten very far when Alice and Bill come right back up in the car, and she rolls down the window and she says, the guard's back. And I said, well, we're going anyway. And she said, you can't go, the guard's back. I said, what am I supposed to do? Take these sacks back inside and say to that aide, I've decided not to escape after all. So she said, how are you going to do that? And I said, I'll figure it out. Here, you take the sacks and you all wait for me and get a picture of me with the guard. Now, basically there wasn't even a board across the entrance road. It was just a guard shack with a sliding glass window. And I had 3 options. I could make a dead run for it, but if this camera lens is wide enough, you can see that I'm not made for running. And secondly, I could try and sneak behind the guard shack and not be seen. And again, if you look at my girth, you can figure out it's hard for me not to be seen. So I opted for the 3rd plan, which was to walk out of there like I owned the place. So I straightened up my posture and took off walking with as much confidence as I could muster. And it was about 200 or 300 yards to the gate, but I wanted to say I did the whole thing on foot. And I did, and got up to the gate, and the guard saw me coming, of course, from a long way back. He slid back the sliding glass door, and I waved at him, said hi, and kept right on walking. And that was it. And they got pictures of me waving to the guard, and of him coming out later and looking at it. And I climbed in the car on the other side of Murfreesboro Road. The interesting thing is they never reported me missing. Didn't even call my emergency contact, which was Alice, to say that I had gone. And for 2 days I laid low, and then on Tuesday I called the superintendent and asked him if I could come out and talk to him. This time I was wearing a coat and tie and all of that. And he didn't believe I'd been a patient there until they looked up my records and called my social worker and so on. So that's how I got out of the hospital.